Hi, welcome to PrepEazy's Informal MBA Chat Series, Episode 3. Today, we are delighted to bring to you Cambridge Business School, which is also called Judge School of Business. Cambridge is a leading institute not only in UK, but is renowned all across the world. Also because Cambridge is one of the oldest universities across the world. And we are delighted to have them on board talking to us. To introduce our panelists, I would now pass it on to my colleague, Abhinav. Over to you, Abhinav.
Thanks, Anant. We are very excited to welcome today, first of all, Sahil. Sahil did his BTech from IIT Roorkee and brings with him 7+ years of experience in management consulting in India and across Middle East. His last stint was with AQ1 Consulting. Next up, we have Tripti. Tripti did her BCom and Masters from Mumbai University and is a finance professional. She brings with her 6 years of experience in financial services, and her last stint was with Crystal. We are very excited to have an interesting chat with both of them. Let's start with our first section, that's Pick Your Fit. And I'm actually going to go to Sahil first. Sahil, Cambridge is a 1 year MBA, it's a 12-month program, right? What prompted you to actually pick a 12-month program as opposed to a standard 18 or a 24-month program? Were you very clear from the first day that you always wanted a 1 year degree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there are a couple of reasons why I took the 12 months program. So one was the ROI, because I think I didn't wanted much time off my job, so that was one of the main factors. Second, I had a pre-MBA consulting experience, so the intention was that I'll pursue consulting after MBA also. So I was pretty much clear about the path. One advice to some incoming students would be that when they are figuring out whether it's a 12 months program or 24 months program, who's the fit for you, one of the key criteria they should think of whether you're looking for a triple jump or not. Because if you want to change your role, your industry, your geography, you actually have to test out the market and you actually see whether this new industry is fit for you. This is something which people get more chance while they pursue a 24-month MBA, while I didn't wanted to experiment that much. So I was pretty much sure that 12-month program that I want to pursue. Um, Additional thing was why Cambridge pursuing the program was, so with Cambridge, it is not only the school that you are attached to, it is also a wider university. So the experience is wide. You get to understand not only the B school people, you also have interactions with different law school, finance, different accounting people. So the perspective is huge there to network. So that was also another criteria. European MBAs, I think, are more international. So my target were always the European MBAs versus the US MBAs, wherein it's a 40% international mix versus a 93 or 90 plus international mix. So yeah, broadly these were the criterias. Specifically, Cambridge was because I wanted a program which actually had less number of MBA students, because when it's a close connection that you build. The networking is good with a small batch versus if you let's say go to other programs which have a 700 plus or 1,000 MBAs incoming. So the networking is quite difficult in those circumstances. So broadly, these were the criteria for me to shortlist why Cambridge is a good fit for me.
Interesting take, Sahil. I think you made a very good point about ROI. So the big difference between a 2 year MBA and a 1 year MBA is that the program length reduces your ROI significantly, and the other factors that you mentioned were relating to the class size, the larger university that Cambridge offers, and gives you that international perspective because European schools offer that 80-90% plus international mix. So some very interesting points coming from Sahil. Just maybe Tripti, you could take this one. Some of the points that Sahil mentioned holds true for some of the other universities in UK as well, right? So UK
Right.
has a lot of other top-notch MBA colleges. And if I could, pick
Yeah.
one of them, Oxford, for instance, is quite identical to some of the criteria that Sahil mentioned. It is associated to a
Right.
large university. It is a one-year program. It has that international mix. So how difficult was it, or what were the differentiating factors for you per se? And maybe Sahil, you could add on to Tripti's answer once she is completed. What were the factors you were evaluating when differentiating between Oxford and Cambridge? Only these two I'm taking because we're talking about UK, but if you were also evaluating some other universities, you could also add a perspective on that.
Right. So my story is like at the complete other end of the spectrum from Sahil, because I have a background in financial services and I actually want to move slightly away from that into a more strategy kind of a role. So the reason I picked Cambridge maybe over some of the other schools is because they have a concentration based approach. So they have about I think 9 concentrations and you can pick those. And I felt like that would be a very structured way to kind of chart my movement from say financial services to something else. That was one. There were two more. The other was that it has more of a what they call an experiential learning. So every term you have a project which is with a live company, and I thought that that would also give me the kind of hands-on experience which I haven't got before to figure out what I really want to do. Of course, I know I want to go into a strategy kind of a role, but what kind of strategy, which industry, all of those things. So I differ a little with Sahil because he said that it's probably better for people who really know what they want to do. But I thought that these experiences will give me a nice chance to figure out what I want to do. Maybe open after speaking to some of the seniors that we have or alumni, what they said is they came across a couple of things during the project which they never knew existed or they never thought that they would like as well. So that was another reason. And I think the last reason was because Cambridge is very close to, or it's part of the Silicon Pen ecosystem, which is like the UK Silicon Valley, right? So I am not especially interested in tech, but we cannot deny the fact that that's where the world is going. And I wanted some exposure to tech just from a perspective of being able to understand parts of it. I don't want to be a coder or anything, but I want to be able to understand it enough that I can speak to a coder tomorrow, right? Like I can be the person who speaks to business and the coder or something like that. So I wanted to kind of get a flavor of that as well. And I think that was one of the bigger differentiation factors between Oxford because Oxford is more humanities based and Cambridge is more tech based. So yeah, those were my reasons.
I think it's always great to get very fresh and different perspectives, and it happens when people come from varied backgrounds. So one great thing that you mentioned is that you actually looked into the concentrations that Cambridge offered and how that differed from, say, a college like Oxford or maybe other one-year programs. Plus, you also mentioned the importance of the location, right? Because Cambridge, as you said, is placed where it's literally placed at the same length or same place where it could actually it feels like it's the Silicon Valley of UK. And you mentioned that we are moving towards a world that's more tech friendly. So you want to be a part of that. You want to immerse yourself in a culture like that, which is great to hear. Sahil, moving on to you. UK has now done something very interesting, which is they've extended the post-study work visa, right? And the rationale, I'm sure, is to attract more and more students, and especially what has happened post Brexit, there, right? How do you see the UK schools or the UK market evolving from this decision? What changes do you think would happen this year and in the years to come?
I think obviously this decision of extending this post-study visa from let's say 6 months to actually 2 years, it's a good decision. Obviously, many students that were quite apprehensive about the job conditions, whether they'll be able to convert a particular job given the COVID scenario also. So these in a way plays a ripple effect, and people tend to do away with, okay, I do not want to do study in UK, rather let me go to another geography like France, which offers the same set of 2 year post-study visa. So obviously this will play a good role. People would be more interested in UK it as an education hub. But personally, for me, when I was shortlisting different programs, this law wasn't there at that. It was still in contention, but it wasn't a formal decision made on out of it. So for me, it was never a question to actually see whether it's a 6 months or it's a 3 months versus a 2 year, because what I believe was these schools are basically top schools, and the brand which you are associated with is too huge to actually be apprehensive about that you are not gonna get a job. You will definitely get a job. It's just about the your selection in terms of whether you are able to get your dream job versus a job that you have to just settle for. So that was my perception when I was applying for UK.
So if
Absolutely.
you don't mind,
Yeah, please
I'd
go on.
just like to chime in here because this did weigh in my decision making. So as Sahil mentioned, it wasn't really a law by then. But from person, not from my personal experience, but from my friend's experience, a couple of years back, he was in the UK to study, and at that point in time, they had reduced the post-study, staying number of months to 4, and I saw the kind of struggles that he went through. Of course, his university was different, and it wasn't the same brand name and all of those things. But that was a bit scary. So when I heard that the UK is changing it or is contemplating changing it, I did increase the number of UK schools that I was going to apply to as compared to what it was before. Because just like Sahil, I was very sure I wanted to be in Europe, but yeah, I did increase that number. That's the impact it had on me.
Sure. I think going back to what Abhinav said, right? It's interesting how between the two of you, both of you are representing two different diverse set of opinions, and that is the idea of an MBA, right? You want to interact and be in a class which is coming from different backgrounds and a different perspective. And very interesting to know that Sahil had a different take and you had a different take. But for the viewers out there, I would probably just take a couple of seconds to summarize. UK has recently amended their laws, and now if you're completing master's level or even undergrad level degree from certain certified universities, you're allowed to stay there for 2 more years and look for a job, which was not the case till just a few months back, and which reflected in the applications. I remember reading some articles a few months back that just in the course of 4 5 months, UK saw applications go up by 90% or something. Please don't hold me to the number, but the interest is definitely showing in the numbers, and people who are evaluating foreign B schools and European B schools, something for you to consider for sure. Going back to you, Tripti, and maybe it's slightly related to the visa part of it. Brexit has been a talking point for a couple of years now, right? And I
Yeah.
was just talking to someone the other day, and the opinion that I was hearing was it's going to help particularly Indians a lot, and maybe Asian community also, because now after the Brexit, essentially all Europeans outside of the Britishers would be on the same level playing field as Indians or any other international
Right.
student, right?
Right.
Do you think that is also going to help an immigrant to find a job, and his competitiveness in the job market would be better off vis-a-vis what it was a few months back? And this Brexit point is a two-sided situation, right? It's a double-edged sword. While it is
Yeah.
helping probably helping, if I could use the word and add a disclaimer there, the job markets and the economy is there's some questions around it. How are you tackling the Brexit uncertainty, if I could ask you that?
Yeah. So, okay, so my work experience has primarily been in the European region. So I used to work very closely with folks who were based out of London, Milan, Paris, etc. And we had one of our meetings with the larger group when the Brexit announcement came through, and I've actually seen people cry and be really upset about it. But over the last 2 years, and that this drama has actually played out, people have started weighing their options. So I could see a lot of the European folks start thinking of moving to continental offices, so continental Europe. So yeah, I mean, on a ground level, it does seem like people are trying to move back to their home country, or at least to the continental part of Europe, because there is a bit of lack of clarity in terms of what is really going to happen to their jobs, or will they be at the same footing as us? How is it going to work? So I have actually seen that movement happening. Now the question is how many jobs will get really replaced versus how many of them will get relocated, because the company that I was working closely with, they actually moved their headquarters for Europe to Dublin. So is this something on paper? Is this something that's really going to turn out? It's not very easy to answer that. I am inherently a little optimistic in general, so I thought maybe this is a good opportunity. And whereas the job market is concerned, whether it's like COVID or Brexit or whatever, the way I am trying to, get better sleep at night is by thinking that, look, we're in a place where everything is super uncertain, right? Like until last year, we were talking about the climate emergency, and that was uncertain. The social inequality part, that's uncertain. So, as people in business, eventually we're going to have to deal with a lot of uncertainty. And the way I am justifying this to myself is if I can deal with this right now, I'm sure I can, deal with it once I actually get a job, I grow, and I hopefully someday become a leader. And, it's kind of practice, like training wheels for it. So that's how I'm looking at it.
I think it's an excellent point that you mentioned, that the number of jobs which are going to remain in UK versus the jobs which are going to be located somewhere else, right? So as you mentioned, headquarters being moved to Dublin, and we've also seen some of the banks being moved to Germany now, the headquarters, right? But then still, the optimism remains, because there's so many other sectors which are just growing, and especially the startup space, the tech space is growing insanely in UK, and it's probably the biggest market in whole of Europe. So even I think I would agree with the optimism that you shared, that people who are going to UK, I personally feel that the job market is going to be stable, and it's only going to work in their favor because of the changes in the law which have been made. Great. So I think this has been a great section, and brings us to our next section now, which is demystifying the application. And this section is all about just unleashing the essays that Cambridge asks you to fill out and submit, and what are the other components of the overall application play. So, Sahil, let's again start with you here. Could you summarize for our viewers what's the process like? What are the essays that you have to submit for Cambridge? I personally feel it's a pretty standard process, but anything additional that you probably want to mention for the Cambridge essays?
Yeah, so I think for the process perspective, it's a pretty standard process. It's actually shorter than few of the other schools which I underwent. So for the application perspective, it's a standard essay which they get. It's a personal statement essay wherein you need to understand or express your views in terms of what you have done in pre-MBA, what are your goals in terms of the future, as well as how you think Cambridge MBA will in a way equip yourself for this future. So that's one. There are essays around your significant achievement. There are essays around your failure. I particularly remember there was one essay wherein we needed to express our teamwork efforts, wherein we worked as a team and what were our learnings. So those were pretty much standard essays. The failure essay was also there. So these are 5 to 6 essays which you'll find in every application that you do for any other B school. That was a standard one. Apart from this, there is one recommendation that you need to give. That recommendation should be from your direct supervisor. So I highly recommend anybody who's applying to judge, make sure that you are in good terms with your immediate supervisor, because this is what they emphasize on, that you should do. It's not mandatory per se, but this is something they say that you should do. Apart from this, I think once you do away with your application, then you are shortlisted for the interviews. There is one standard interview which happens. So Cambridge gives you a flexibility actually in this case. So they organize a D-Day kind of a thing wherein you are invited to Cambridge in UK to actually experience the school and conduct the so interviews is conducted there on the campus. In case you are not able to make it to the campus, you could do a Skype interview with those. So it's originally only a one interview that happens. In case they are not sure about the decision, they might conduct a second one, but mostly the decision is made in the first interview itself. So yeah, it's a short interview, around 30 minutes. It happens. Pretty much standard questions in terms of what you have been, what you want to do, and few situational based questions wherein they ask or keep you in a situation. For example, for me, one of the question was that your manager does not agree with you. How do you convince your manager or the peers? So that was a situation based question. It could be as random as what is the last book that you read, what were your learnings out of it. So the interview is basically held with a future professor. So the person who's interviewing you is the professor who's going to teach you when you're in the school. So he pretty much evaluates you based on random topics, what you have mentioned in your applications. So I think that in a way, after you clear off the interview, you get the offer. So that pretty much sums up the process.
Great. Thank you so much, Sahil. I think this was a very elaborate and comprehensive answer. You took us through the entire journey of the application, starting from applications right to interview and to all the way getting the offer. And you also did touch upon the content of the essay. And while it may be standard for the viewers, this is what Sahil probably was trying to say is there's a lot, while the process is standard, but there's a lot of introspection that needs to go into writing those essays, and you need to maybe spend some time reflecting about some of the softer skills, some of the softer aspects about your profile, the fit part of it, the strengths, the weaknesses, career goals, and some of those things. So thanks a lot, Sahil. If you want to probably quickly jump in here and add your interview experience, something about the interview experience, because probably it was a bit different.
Yes. Okay. So just and a couple of things on the essay as well. So what I would suggest, and this is something I started suggesting to people after I applied, that whether you want to apply to B school or not, just take some B school's essays and write them down, because that introduces you to yourself. So please do that. And there are some small questions as well in the judge application, which are not essays per se, but they ask you about your career path and things like that. So ensure that you write all of these questions together, because they have to look very holistic. You can't have something different going on in your essays and something different in these smaller questions, which are not called out as essays. Okay. That was an important thing. And I feel like the interview was more to just see if who you are as a person is it the same person who wrote the essays, because a lot of people take help to write their essays. So try not to do that. Get people to read your essays, but make sure the language is your own, because one of the things that they do is they want to assess that you are the person who wrote that and you can stick to it. So my interview experience, and I actually couldn't go to Cambridge. And for anyone who's interviewing, I would suggest please go, because I've heard such magical things about it that I'm having massive FOMO that I didn't go. But I don't think it had a bearing on whether I got in or I didn't get in or anything. So it's not about that, because I had massive anxiety. I was like, should I have gone? Would that have made a big difference or anything? So I don't think that's the point, but it's a beautiful experience from everything that I've heard from other people. So please make sure that you make every effort to go if that is possible. Maybe due to COVID, they changed the whole thing. But from everything that I've spoken to a lot of people, people have had different experiences with their interviews. So what I realized is they're very, very adept at picking the right people to interview you. And they know exactly why they want to interview you. So maybe because I wanted to move streams and I said I want to do something different, they were kind of trying to assess what skills I have, which I can take to a new industry and it will work out there as well. But if you indicate that you want to continue in the same industry, they might assess more technical related things. So try to think of what your story is and what you're going to speak about. Another thing which I heard recently from one of my seniors, and this was related to a job interview, but I think this would help in a regular interview as well, is there are some fit questions which are generally asked in job interviews. So you might want to just Google that and try to have an answer or at least two answers per question. Because this was something that I struggled with in my interview, because they asked me about my failure. And the answer I gave, the interviewer was not too happy with. So, I had to think on my feet and come up with something else. Of course, it's my story, so I could. But, if you just want to be extra prepared. For every fit question, try to have like 2 instances at least.
Interesting. Thanks a lot,
Uh,
Tripti. Sorry, Sahil, you want to add
just to
something?
just
Yeah,
ju-
please go.
just to add to Tripti, so I had a couple of advice for the people who are applying for the same. So for the essays particularly, so there's an approach called a star approach, which is S stands for the situation, T stands for the task, A stands for the action, and R stands for the results. So it's basically a story which you tell in the essays, whether it's a failure story, it's an achievement story. You just try to break this down in terms of the star approach and actually elaborate, whether it's an essay, whether it's an interview. This is the approach that everyone should follow. Secondly, in order to prepare for the interview, so one of the things which I did personally was I did quite a good of secondary research on the internet to see the portfolio of questions, the pool of questions that were asked in different schools. So I actually created a set of around 150 questions, odd questions, which could be ranging from a fit question to literally a very random question about anything else. So this is what I did when I created this exhaustive list. I sat down and actually write down these answers or bullet points basically as to what I'll say into the interview, and this in a way helped me actually get a good grasp on my story as well as the interview questions that could be asked and what would be my response to those. So any applicant, this should be one of the key things that they should do in the interviews. They create this pool of questions, and even they can actually try and rehearse the answers in front of a mirror, or they can record your expressions to actually improve your presentation. This would go a long way when you do the interviews. Yeah.
I can really see the difference between a consultant and a non-consultant right now because his style was so structured in his approach, and I'm just trying to think what I didn't do any of these things.
I could
I
see you
wish
smiling
I
when he
had
was
now.
answering.
Yeah, I was like, oh my god, like I don't know how I got in.
Great, but thanks a lot, both Sahil and Tripti. A lot of very insightful views coming out, and for the viewers, you've actually spilled the beans and let out a lot of secrets about the interviews, about the essay questions, and that is the idea of doing these interviews. And for viewers, follow some of these advices that both Tripti and Sahil have made here, and it could really help you crack your dream B school, be it Cambridge or be it someone else. Great. So this brings us to end of our section 2. Great. So this brings us to our next section, which is called networking mantra. And maybe Tripti, you could start this section. Networking is very spoken about word and concept, but a lot of people end up going wrong with it. How did you approach your networking strategy for Cambridge? Who did you network with? How much earlier before your application did you start? Some of the insights about your networking strategy, if I could ask you.
Right. So I think I am not very good at networking. I mean, definitely not online. I mean, offline, I'm very happy to talk to a lot of people, but online, I've always found it a little tricky because, somebody is just randomly DMing you and, asking you questions. So I was a bit slow to start with it. So I would suggest that you might want to start much earlier when you start considering your B schools, because it really gives you a sense of what the school is about, right? Like one piece of advice that I got recently, and this was about a cover letter, but it will work for the essays, is that if you change the name of the organization and the essay sounds right, it's not good enough because it has to be tailor-made to the company or to the college. So you really need to start speaking to people early on. I think the way to do it is probably go check out who the alumni of the relevant school is, send them an invite with a note saying that, this is why I'm writing to you. A lot of times people just send an invite and, you really don't know why this has come into your inbox or whatever. So yeah, that was something that I really didn't do and I should have done. But once you get shortlisted for the interview, Cambridge does a really nice thing. They add you to a LinkedIn group and they give you access to an app called UniBuddy. So there are some people who have volunteered from the previous class to actually answer your questions because there's so much going on and you want to really know. So it's a nice thing that they actually do it very proactive from their end. So from that point is when I actually got super comfortable with the networking aspect, because it was just easier than randomly messaging people. But after that, after I got comfortable, I think now I am way more comfortable just writing to people saying that, hey, this is what I'm doing, etc. Can you please help me out? And 7 out of 10 times, I think people are really happy to help out. There is a bit of a lag. So what I would suggest is, if you want an answer on the 10th of August, please write to people on the 1st or the 2nd, so that you can remind them again, and you can still get an answer, because everybody is busy, right? Like, your application is super important to you, but maybe not super important to someone else, right? So that was something I learned. Earlier, I used to get really kind of frustrated that, this person really doesn't want to talk to me, or, I'm kind of annoying to this person. But that's not the case. They're just generally busy. So you have to give them a couple of days. And I think now I've gotten much comfortable with it. And then after I got into Cambridge, obviously with that Cambridge tag and the judge tag, it's much easier to talk to people, because we're like family now. We're part of the same group. We're part of the same cohort. And I think even within ourselves, I know a lot of people who magically have reached out to each other even prior to the interview and prior to getting in. That was something I didn't do, and I think that is really, really important, and we should try to do that. If Sahil has done it, I would really ask him how he did it. So, Sahil, if you want to chime in on that.
Great. So I think for our viewers, LinkedIn is the go-to channel. It's the most recommended channel, but some good insights coming, especially from Tripti on this part, that whenever you reach out, just reach out with a clear intent and make a note. Just don't throw out random requests. It does not look nice, and the other person has no reason to accept your invite. Okay? Just make a small note whenever you send out any invites, and just do not expect immediate responses. So if you want something to be written back to you or by a particular time, please give enough time to the people you have requested, so that they can revert back. And maybe like 7 days or 10 days is good enough, but just don't expect them to reply back in 24 hours. Not everybody will do that.
Tripti, if I could maybe ask another question on, given we're talking about networking. Networking is twofold. One is, obviously talking to the alumni and the current students, and second is trying to speak directly to the admissions committee, because a lot of these admissions committee are out there in India, sometimes virtually, sometimes physically, for these education fairs and one-on-one sessions. Did you attend any of these seminars or does Cambridge host any of these seminars in India? How active they are in the
Yeah.
Sorry, please.
No, go on. I thought you were.
Right. So I just wanted to get your take on networking with the school per se. Like, of course, you mentioned, both of you covered in quite detail about how you networked with the alumni. If you could tell me a networking strategy with the admissions committee and the school body.
Right. So I don't think that Cambridge does events in India. I might be wrong, because I was a bit underinformed about these things when I started my journey. But I did attend it for another B school, and it was a lot of fun because they had done drinks, they had gotten us to meet the previous batches, alumni, things like that. In terms of, directly speaking to the ADCOM, I think that was something I actually started doing once I had applied, and not before that. So I'm not really sure how much I can weigh in on, what this is. But what I would suggest to people is that all the schools, whichever school you're targeting, they're very active on social media. They have their own YouTube channels. Cambridge also has a podcast which is called Changing Careers, I believe. So try to, listen to some of these things, because that gives you a flavor of what the school is all about. Like, it's a bit different than actually just attending the webinar as such, because the webinar is just like another marketing exercise, right? And you will be able to tell what separates each school from each other. But if you want to know like a nuanced version of it, try to listen to their podcasts or their YouTube videos, because that's where you'll see what are the themes that they're really covering. Are those themes something that I identify with, and those kind of things. So I don't think I networked with the ADCOM of Cambridge as much as I probably did with some of the other schools. But the adcom is super, super helpful. They always get back very soon. I'm not really sure how much this helps from a networking perspective, but from a support perspective, especially given the kind of times that we're in, I felt like they were extremely helpful and extremely supportive. And they were always quick to respond. Like they knew that, we're new to this whole thing. In fact, there was a time when I was constantly emailing them, and one of them just picked up the phone and called me and said, you know what, this is just easier on the phone. And so then it started feeling like, okay, this relationship is going somewhere, and it's a two-way street. It's not like I am constantly writing to them and they're like, okay, this is just another student kind of a thing. So that's been my experience with the adcom. I'm not really sure how it answers your question to networking, but yeah, unfortunately, that's how it was with me.
Sahil, you have a take on this?
Yeah, so in terms of the networking with the AdCom, to be honest, I also didn't do much in that sphere, because most of my questions were addressed whether to be a webinar. So there was one webinar that they host online. So that was something that I attended. It was a pretty simple webinar in terms of the process, not much to actually gain insights to the program itself. So those specific questions is something that was adhered through alumni networking. Apart from this, I don't think so. I have interacted with AdCom, but to be honest, just to reiterate what Tripti was saying, the AdCom has been super supportive of us in this times, because I think I particularly had two offers from different, and at the time when I was reconsidering as to which one should I pick, uh, there was a drastic difference in terms of support that I got from admissions committee of Cambridge versus admission committee of the other school. So that was also one of the key differentiating factors, that if the careers team and the admissions team is so much supportive here, it tilted my decision in Cambridge actually. So that was quite helpful. And yeah, so I think if you have any questions, they are always available. They actually have, I think, a rule of 2 business days to actually respond to any query. So that's pretty much they go by it. And yeah, so I think in any queries for any applicant, feel free to shoot out to admissions committee, and they'll be happy to help you out.
Sure. Well, I think both Tripti and Sahil, you mentioned that you didn't network extensively with the school AdCom per se, but if I could, cherry pick some of the points that you made and summarize it for viewers. So for the viewers, Tripti did mention that all these schools are quite active in social media. Sahil mentioned they're quite readily available on responding on the emails. They have a rule of 48 business hours where they reply. So in case if you have any question, both of you mentioned they're very supportive. While you can always address questions directly to alumni, but if you're uncomfortable, if you're not getting a great response rate from there is no harm reaching out directly to the AdCom. They are there for you to support you even during your application stages. Great. So this brings us to the end of our section 3, which was networking mantra. And we can now move on to the next section, which is called support and guidance. So maybe Sahil, you could start on this one, given how taxing this whole B school journey is, and most of the candidates end up applying to multiple schools. It is extremely, consuming, and most of us are doing it while we are in a full-time job. So if I could ask a question around the support framework that you had around you while you were going through the applications of different B schools, who were your pillars of strength, be it in family, be it in friends? A lot of people, I think Tripti mentioned it in her earlier answer, some people approach counselors for getting the essays reviewed, written. Very good. I would like your take on that. So if you could just summarize the support mechanism that you had around you for the applications.
Okay, so I think when I was completed with my GMAT, I had a lot of horrors with respect to what the application process would be, how I would be able to create those essays, those impactful essays per se. So with all these set of things, I asked a couple of friends, so they advised me actually to go to admission consultant, just try out in terms of how the experience is. So this is what I did. So I basically had an initial consultant who helped me out into choosing the B schools. They helped me out also in the interview stage, end-to-end consulting, basically from shortlisting to essays to the interview. So it was an end-to-end application support that they give to me. So that was one part, to be honest. Second is something which is very important in this scenario. Why? Because is support is one thing which they give you. The second thing is when you actually get down to writing those essays, there are different qualities that you need to actually express in your essays, which are good qualities. And who better knows than your family to actually help you out in those qualities which they see every day now when you are practicing those. So it's very important to have that support from family, have their views when you are sitting down on creating those essays, the content itself. And if let's say you are not sure on your verbal skills like me, you can hire an application consultant for the same. But just consider that the consultant will not work day in day out for you. You actually have to do it yourself. It's just that you have a support all throughout that journey, which calms you down and gives you enough confidence to actually crack the B school.
Interesting. So you use a very powerful combination of an external consultant as well as your family. It's, I think that's a very holistic way of doing the applications. One very interesting thing you touched upon, Sahil, was the fact that the consultants are there to support you and to guide you, but by no means are they going to write down your essays. So anybody who thinks this, please, this is a myth, and just make sure that whenever you're writing your essays, even though you have your consultant support, the finer aspects are really brought out when you actually sit with somebody who's very, very close to you, so your family, your friends, your relatives. On the same lines, Tripti, just coming to you. So, did you follow the same process as Sahil, or was your journey a little different?
Right. So I did use the help of a consultant, but that was mainly to do more of the documentation and the actual, like, form filling and all those things, because I was just like a lot of other people working at the same time. And I'm not sure for those people who know how the University of Mumbai works to get transcripts and things like that. It's a massive headache. So that was my main concern of going to a consultant, because I knew which schools I wanted to apply to. So I didn't really need them for that bit. In terms of the essays, I mean, a part of the package obviously is that they look at your essays and things like that. But I don't think I really used that bit actively, because I didn't want my voice in the essay to go away in some way. So the way I used the consultant from that perspective was the same way that I used my friends, or I took help from some of my colleagues, or even my skip levels, because okay, so people at my work knew I was applying, so I took a lot of help. So I just got a different perspective from them, because, and this is something I do in my day-to-day job as well. If I'm writing a big email, I will always get someone else to read it, because that email comes inherently, or that essay comes inherently from you, and you make a lot of assumptions, but a third person will not see it the same way. So that's where I use the consulting support, just to get a third person's perspective, but definitely not from a choosing school, or writing the essay as such perspective, because I have a very eclectic way of writing and speaking. So if somebody else had written that for me, the interviewer would have known in the first shot that, look, this is not the same person who had written or spoken about this. So that was something I really wanted to avoid. In terms of the other support, yes, my family has been super, super supportive. I mean, I'm India, and it's not always easy for families to be like, okay, go wherever you want and study. And my family has always been fairly supportive of that. So I know this sounds like a lifetime award speech or something, but yeah. And on the formality side, I think my mom did a lot of the running around to the university. So I've been super lazy on that front. So with the consultant, she was kind of liaising on those fronts. So, and otherwise, yeah, I did speak to my friends a lot. I did speak to some of the folks at work who are also my friends, to get a sense of what they think. My skip level director was actually one of the people who encouraged me to do this, to take this step. So he was extremely supportive, and he was actually quite motivational. He was one of my recommenders as well. So yeah, I think it's been a struggle, but it's been like a very supported struggle. And another thing that was very helpful was the fact that, and this is something that I did, and I would advise a lot of people, is that you should really take time out to write your essays. So don't do it after a work day or something like that. Take at least 2 days to yourself to figure it out. So because you need to take all that time off, you need a lot of support from your colleagues, from your friends, and the other thing that I used to do is I used to, always be thinking about the essays or the application, and it was something that would go on in my mind all the time. So I think my friends and my family have been super helpful because they would ask me questions and I would be thinking about my essay, and I would be like really giving them mindless answers. So they've been extremely patient with me from that perspective as well. So yeah, that's been my journey.
Amazing. I think it's very beautiful to know how you had both of you had support through your family and friends. And Tripti, you mentioned that you had a lot of support from your company and your peers and your seniors at work, which is very interesting. I've seen some people are very scared to approach. Of course, to like it's different from case to case. But if you think you have a good rapport with your supervisor, with someone senior at work, you can always reach out to them as well. And if I could, maybe just pick one part of one theme that both of you were speaking about. So I've seen this misconception that a lot of people who are approaching the applications for the, like in the beginning phases, they assume that a consultant is going to write their essays. And I think both of you emphasize enough on it that think of it, if I could use a different term for a consultant, think of a consultant as a mentor who's there as a professional sounding board for you, who will validate your thoughts, who will give you the right directions to think on, maybe review, do those edits. But please don't expect a counselor to write your essays. And even if someone is, the admissions bodies are smart enough, they've been doing this is their profession, right? So they understand the genuineness and the authenticity of it.
Right. So this brings us to the end of this segment. Let's move on to our next section, which is one of my favorites, busting the myths. And let me start with Tripti. Tripti, any general myths that you came across during your MBA journey, whether it was about Cambridge in general, whether it was about GMAT or essays, anything that you want to bust for our audience here?
Yes. So the myth is that GMAT is the most important part of the application. And it was something that even I believed in. And as you can see, my GMAT score is below 700, it's 680. And when I was practicing, it was, like 700, 710. So when I gave the attempt, I was extremely nervous. And I was like, this is not happening to me. This is really bad, all of those things. And I think that took away from some of my essay related, preparation of sorts. So what I want to say, and look, I cannot speak about schools in the US because they were never my target, but schools in Europe always maintain that the GMAT is one part of the entire application. It's your story that matters, it's your experience that matters. And after I applied, obviously I got selected. So, it's not as bad as I had initially thought. And after speaking to the AdCom, the careers team, eventually, speaking to some of my cohort, I realized that, yeah, the GMAT is actually not the only important thing. So please don't get bogged down if your score is like super. I mean, of course, if it's not a competitive score, then you need to try again. But don't have that thing that it's the only thing and I'm going to keep trying, and that's all it's going to be about, because the essays, the interview, all of these things definitely mattered a lot as well.
Interesting. Sahil, would you want to add to something that Tripti said? Any other myth that you came across while you were going through your journey?
Yeah, I think there is one more myth. Not exactly a myth, I would say, but there was a situation when you are shortlisted for an interview, and you need to make a decision that whether you want to go for the interview in Cambridge, or you have to take a decision to take a Skype interview. So that was, to be honest, for me also a tough decision, because it's a huge investment to actually go apply for visa, be there at Cambridge, thinking that you'll get selected. You may or may not. So obviously that's a point that you need to consider. So to any applicant, if you're shortlisted for interview, if you opt for a Skype interview also, it's perfectly fine, because I think
I was
Tripti is
a Skype
also.
interview, yeah.
Exactly. Even I was also a Skype interview candidate. So it does not make any difference in terms of the evaluation, whether you are actually visiting the campus versus actually doing a Skype interview. So uh, based on your situation, you can take that decision. It will not hamper your decision.
Right. I think it's a quite a coincidence that both of you are the ones who opted to do a Skype interview, because even I always thought that it, and it's a real myth that Cambridge interview needs to be attended in person. And we have two successful candidates who have got through the journey without actually going to the college for the interview. Thank you so much for your insights on the myths part of it. And which brings us to our last section, and it's called the words of wisdom. The entire interview has been having bits and pieces and lots of wisdom that you've shared. But if I could ask you, what would be your top one or two words of wisdom for the aspiring applicants to judge for the coming cycles? Sahil, you could maybe start, and Tripti, you could add.
Yeah, sure. So probably I think the most important part is when you're going for the interview is your preparation, how well you're versed with the backstory. So I think the key things which I said with respect to knowing your backstory, knowing, having that pool of questions with you, and jotting down different answers. So that basically prepares you for any scenario that you can actually come in the interview, because I think professors are real smart guys. They'll find loopholes in your application and actually ask specifically those questions, because they thoroughly go through your profile, and they have 2 to 3 different questions that they want to test your knowledge on, whether the essays that you have written are right on your own or not, or whether the things you have mentioned with respect to your experience are right or not. So that's something which is very important. You need to be very well versed with your application, and the preparation has to be very thought of in terms of the questions that will be asked. uh, Overall, I think that's it. In terms of the creation of essays, obviously the star approach is very important, that you need to keep in mind, because always think of it as you are a storyteller, that you need to tell a story and engage the audience to actually understand, oh, that was a situation, okay, he took this action, this was the result. So basically they should be able to see you as a business person already, in terms of applying those skills which you're going to learn in the B school. So yeah, this is something that every applicant should keep in mind.
Tripti, let's move on to you. Top two, three suggestions for incoming candidates.
Okay. All right. So three, right? So the first one is, and I made this mistake that I took the process very linearly. So I said, okay, I'll do the GMAT first, then I'll do the essays, then I'll apply. Don't do that. Read the essays right from the day that you plan to apply, because it gives you an insight into what the school wants. It keeps that, thought process going on at the background, so that, whenever you're at work or, volunteering or doing anything, you can think of, oh, this is something I want to talk about. And I used to always have like a notes section open on my phone where I would just quickly type that down, because your story is filled of so many mini stories, so it's very hard to know which one you want to pick. So in this way, you can create your own database, and you'll always have something that you can come back to. So that's something which I think was super helpful for myself. The second thing was more so related to, how and when to write the essays. So as I was telling you, I would suggest to people that please take some time off to do this, because I mean, I don't know if the GMAT is the most important part, but your story is definitely the most important part, because it's going to come in your essays and in your interview. So please take some time off, because you need that mental bandwidth away from work, away from other things, to actually construct a nice essay and talk about your life in a nice way. Because everybody has a unique story, right? And you have to talk about why it's unique. The star approach is yeah, absolutely bang on. And the last bit, and this is something that I personally struggled with, was making the one page CV that is there. I mean, I've had 5 years of experience, and putting those 5 years on one page was extremely difficult. And I know there are people who had way more experience than me, way diverse experience than me. So that is something that is a bit of a struggle. But you have to think of this whole thing as a holistic process. Again, don't do it linearly. So that when you're writing your story, you'll also know that okay, these are the points I want to add in my CV. These are the points I don't want to. And a mistake that I made is I didn't use the star approach in my CV as well. But please use that because it's extremely important to pointedly show what was the situation, what did you do, what was the outcome. So just writing that, I was a part of a lot of problem solving activities. But that doesn't really give you a sense of what was the achievement. So it's nicer to write led problem solving activities which resulted in 1,000 man hours of saving. Like, that tells the whole story in one point. So that's how you need to approach the CV as well. So yeah, I think those are my three top points.
Amazing. I think some really good suggestions coming for our viewers, and for the viewers, please take notes. These are words of wisdom coming from two successful Cambridge applicants. Which brings us to our end of this episode of trying to get insights of Cambridge and share it with our viewers. And I would like to just thank both of you for your time, for your views, and for agreeing to do this. And it has been an amazing experience chatting with you. And congratulations once again for judge, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much, both you guys, for taking out the time. And as Anand said, we wish you the best in your journeys. And to Sahil's point, I really hope that by the time you guys graduate, because you'll be graduating before, in 1 year's time, that the market is as bullish as it can be in the UK, and you guys can find your dream jobs.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys,
Thank you
and
so
thank
much.
you for putting this together. I'm sure if I had access to this last year, it would have made my journey smoother. So thank you for doing that from everyone's
Totally.
behalf.
Totally agreed. Thank you so much, Anant and Anubhav. I think this is a good session. Actually, if let's say it's the same thing that as they said, that if you would have actually had access to such videos, it would have made our journey quite simpler. And a lot of anxiety which we had during the whole process might not have been at at that point. So yeah, kudos to you guys and best of luck for your journey.
Thanks a lot, both of you.
So
Thanks a lot for the lovely words, and thank you.